Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Planning for Healthy Communities with Sinala Planning and uh, Chwelt, sorry, I apologize. I should have asked about how to pronounce that. Maybe it's Cwelt Consulting. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Please feel free to introduce yourself and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Serene Squawkin. I am the Learning Circle Manager. I am Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory Apache and Belgian settler on my father's side. I will be the moderator for today's discussion during the Q&A. And joining us today, working behind the scenes, is Kira, our program assistant. They'll be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I will provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure you're looking after yourself. And if at any point in time you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. Now I'll turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves.
All right. Hi. Thanks, everyone. Um, really glad and excited that we have been invited here. I'm just going to put up our first slide. So, welcome, everyone. Today's panel is called Planning for Healthy Communities. And we're really excited to be here. I know there's going to be a lot of knowledge and experience also in the audience, so please feel free to chime in with questions, comments in the chat. I will be able to have a look and address some questions at the end. And I hope you guys walk away feeling inspired, understanding a bit more about what we do as planners and how the discipline of planning can contribute to the health and well-being of Indigenous communities. So kind of the central thesis today is how Indigenous community planning can positively impact Indigenous health. And we have a great panel for you today with a real mix of a background and experience and planning practice that is going to help us answer this. So we're going to do a brief introduction, and I'll start with myself. So my name is Sasha Lindsay. I am Métis Cree. I'm a member of the George Gordon First Nation in Saskatchewan. I am a senior planner with Sonala. And how I got into planning, my first step into planning was as a student at UBC, where I ended up leading an Indigenous naming process on campus that brought um, the language of the land of the territory, Hunkaminam, back onto campus in the form of names on buildings. We kind of facilitated that process, and I started to get to feel for community engagement and working with systems. And that led me to planning school. I then worked in Indigenous engagement for the city of Vancouver, for the park board for a while, a bit of marine planning, and now I'm working as a consultant and I get to do a bit of all of it. So I'm going to pass it next to Jessie to introduce herself.
Gillikis la nuku am tlali logula, can la nakwitao lu liquitlacht lu meiti, gukulans nanemuch, Gillikis la nanemuch. Gillikis la local clay. Good morning, everybody. So nice to have so many of you joining us. Just introduce myself in Malcolm Gala. So I'm Jessie Hempel. One of my traditional names is Tlali Logula. which can be translated to mean bridge between the worlds or leader of the pack. And I just let you know that I'm from the Nakwitdal and the Ligwitlauk tribes of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation on my mother's side, member of the Gwasanakodo Nations up in Kwagate territory in Port Hardy. And also on my father's side, come from the Marion family, Red River Métis. And I live in Snuneymuxw territory, acknowledging that I'm joining from these beautiful territories where I live. It's a rainy kind of gray day, but very cozy. Nice morning to be with you all. I'm also seeing some familiar names in the participant list, so just a special good morning to the two Andreas, to Susanna, to Karen. My cousin Shannon's going to watch this recording later. And anyone else I've missed. Chantel will be keeping an eye on chat throughout, and just really grateful that y'all chose to be with us today. Sasha's asked us to talk a little bit about our journey into planning. Man, that could be like a whole hour and a half, hey? But I'll keep mine brief before we pass it on to the next intro. So in brief, my journey into planning is that I studied linguistics and Indigenous studies at UVic after graduating and leaving my hometown, and realized that it's really tricky to do good work in one area when there are so many holistic integrated needs. In my own community, I saw the need for concurrent work in all kinds of different dimensions, and desired a way to think about it more holistically. And right at that moment, a planning role opened up as a comprehensive community planning coordinator, and began my now like 16-year career in planning. So I moved home to my res with no prior planning facilitation experience, jumped into a role as a CCP assistant and then coordinator, and never looked back, and made a lot of mistakes. Was very lovingly corrected and coached by elders and knowledge keepers in my own community, by little kids in my own community, and then had the privilege to take what I had learned and start to work in wider spheres, supporting the growth of the comprehensive community planning community of practice, and then the Indigenous community planning community of practice here in BC, and then working all across Canada over the last decade and a half. So lots of teachers along the way, and working really hard to take my own learnings, my own mistakes, and share them as widely as possible. In that time, I also spent a little bit of time as a leader in local government. So in 2011 and again in 2014, I was elected to council for the district of Port Hardy as the youngest woman at 27 and the first person to have grown up in a local First Nation to be on town council. Got a lot of cool experience in local government and got to do a lot of beautiful advocacy there. Made a lot of good friends in that world as well. In that time, I also served on my nation's ECDEV Corporation Board of Directors, and in 2016 to 2018 did my own planning masters at VIU after we moved here to Snuneymuxw territory to pursue some more education with my lovely husband, Jermaine. In that time, founded a company originally called Alderhill, with the original co-founders, Elaine Alec and Chris Derrickson. And 2019, had my first baby, started teaching at UBC, started teaching at VIU, kept on consulting. In 2023, Elaine and Chris left the company. We rebranded to Sonala. We continue to do incredible Indigenous planning work with incredible Indigenous planners, including everyone here, except for Serene, but Carrie's been an incredible member of the company in the past, and we're so happy to see her thriving now. Dana, Katie, and Sasha, of course, all so blessed to have them as members of the Sonala team. I had another baby in 2023 and have another coming in January. And so my planning practice is very much grounded in how to take care of myself and my family and make sure that our household is grounded in our own well-being and in our culture and in the goodness of life, so that I can, through all my work, whether it's teaching or planning, speaking, just reflect that joy and that well-being and that goodness and that grounding out and try and share whatever I can with other people with humility. So I'm going to end it there and pass it back to Sasha to carry on.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I'm going to pass it next to Kara. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into this wild world of planning.
Sasha, thank you. Waita chwaita, chokwinoch, Melda S. Basil and Squawk Slickdows S. Lechwin, Atakamus Emun Twin. Good morning, everyone. Hello. My Slichwam name is Melda. That comes from, it was gifted to me in ceremony by my grandparents, Tom and Irene Basil, many, many years ago when I was in high school. And my English name is Cara Basil. And so I come into this space as a Slichwam woman. My pronouns are she, her. And I grew up in my community, Bonaparte, for many years until leaving for university. And I now live in Kamloops Territory, otherwise known as Kamloops, BC. I'm currently joining today, though, from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories as I'm here for work this week, and really, really excited to be joining and seeing folks joining from all over as well. I come into this space as a planner, and for some time I struggled to identify as a planner because I come in with no formal planning training and really was mentored into this role. So about a decade ago, I started when I was an elected councillor for my community, Bonaparte. I was asked to start our comprehensive community plan and was mentored by incredible Indigenous planners like Jesse and Elaine Alec and Chris Derrickson and many others, especially folks from my nation who mentored me in a way to do this in the best way for our people, for our community. And so from that time, and getting to do that work directly in my community, got to progress into various roles where I supported in other areas of spending time as an elected councillor for about 2 terms before deciding I wanted to grow and be able to bring more back to my community, and so wanted to pursue my master's. So I do have a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Thompson Rivers University. I then began my Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies at UBCO in 2020, while I was also the traditional wellness lead for my nation's health society. And that's when my passion for being in the health field really it just came to fruition, and I felt at home. I felt like this was my purpose. And so since 2019, I've been really focusing on traditional wellness, health and wellness focused work, Indigenous health. And I focused my master's research in palliative care for First Nations and got to do that work with my grandmother's community, Esquette, which is a remote community just about 45 minutes outside of Williams Lake. And so in this decade, have gotten to work with a number of different nations, communities, organizations in focusing on community-based, nation-based planning, doing planning in a different way that really suits how our communities want to see planning, how they see themselves within this planning work, and how I can support alongside in ways that really align with Indigenous values, with Secwepemc values, myself, and coming into this work. And so I found a passion for this because when I was in my own community and being an elected counselor and thinking about how are we going to move forward? How are we going to progress as a people in a really good way? And what does that look like? And when planning was introduced to me, it was the first time while I was in term for council that something felt hopeful. And I fell in love with planning because it felt like a space could be created for people to dream, to be hopeful about what it could look like to move forward, about thinking about our future and all the generations that we need to plan for, and really not leaving anyone behind. And so that's how I came into planning work and continue to be in planning work today. I have my company, Cwelcwélt Consulting. And so I'm really honored to have come from Sonala previously and now kind of venturing out on my own, but getting to be here today with the team as well. So thanks so much for having me, everyone. I will pass it back over and the next person can go.
Thanks so much, Kara. Next, I'm going to pass it to Katie to introduce themselves. Thanks.
Hi, Sego Sawagwego, Katie Turf, you get Spaniki Hagan and Wako Juan Joda, Dahno, Buddhist Gade near Quadrade, Akusasni, Nido again near Quadrade, Nitone near Quadrade, Nekji, Belleville, Nido Ageno. My name is Katie Turf. My family is Mohawk and mixed European. My Mohawk family is from the Francis family line from Akwesasne, which borders Ontario, Quebec, and New York. and we are Bear Clan. And I was born and raised in Belleville, Ontario. And I have mixed European ancestry, namely Scottish, is where my last name is from. I've been a planner with Sonala Planning since November 2022, so just at 3 years now. And I really love my job. I'm excited to talk a bit more about planning today. I got into planning in my undergrad, which seems kind of rare to be planning so early. And I will be honest, I don't really remember what got me into that as an undergrad, 18-year-old. I think I was just really curious about community and what community means. But the more interesting story is how I got into Indigenous community planning. I was very frustrated in my undergrad degree that everyone was so interested and invested about really, really big cities. And I never grew up in a large city. A lot of my classmates were from Toronto, specifically. I studied at University of Waterloo, just outside Toronto there. And so there was lots of talk of zoning and I don't know, really confusing city policies that just weren't resonating with me at the time. And I was really curious about, small remote fly-in communities. Not that I grew up in one or had ever really visited one, but the curiosity about how they care for themselves was really pressing to me. And then there was an opportunity to study my language, Mohawk language. I had never really learned it as a kid at all. We had been about 4 generations out from speaking Mohawk. So I had to take this opportunity. It was an obligation that I put on myself. And so starting to learn Mohawk really opened the doors to how Indigenous communities plan for themselves. And I think that was in the third year of my 5-year degree that I started to learn Mohawk. And after that, really started to focus my studies in what is Indigenous community planning, and how do Indigenous communities, positioned, especially with First Nations and their sort of political positions, um, must plan absolutely differently than a municipality. I was really interested in those sorts of the policy and the legal framework of planning at the time. I did an undergrad thesis in conceptualizing a Haudenosaunee framework of planning. So kind of taking, settler planning, and we'll go into this a bit more in the presentation together, but taking settler planning's concepts of, for example, the public interest, and looking into my nation's approaches to planning and seeing what the differences are there. COVID hit. And so COVID hit about maybe 2 months before I was finishing up that undergrad thesis. And it pushed me to a master's program. And I was looking around at, last minute opportunities to study. And I was able to get into UBC's Indigenous Community Planning concentration in the SCARP program. So that was a pivot that I was absolutely not expecting. I did not expect to move across the country to study something that my home nation really inspired in me. And I'm still finding my footing here. I've been on, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory since September of 2020, with no plans of moving back. That's kind of how it goes sometimes. But I'm really, really fortunate to be here and to explore Indigenous community planning, mainly in the BC context, while keeping my Haudenosaunee and Mohawk roots very, very close to my heart, and inspiring how I approach planning and what planning is. So that's a bit of why I'm here, and I'm really excited to chat more. Thanks so much.
Oh my God, I love that I'm learning the origin stories of my colleagues too, as you all do as well. This is wonderful. And last but not least, the earring champion. I'm going to pass it on to Dana Moraes to introduce herself. Thank you.
Hawa, Haichika, Sasha. Of course, I'm definitely winning today. Okay. Good morning, Singait La. But Ewens Hanadakigaga. But Ewens is my Haida name. and I belong to both the Musqueam Indian Band and the Haida Nation. And I'm zooming in from my home in beautiful Skidegate, Haida Gwaii, where it's currently storming, 100-kilometer-an-hour winds. And I love that people have started some of their check-ins with what the weather is like outside, because here in Haida Gwaii, we don't say, hi, how are you? We say, so how is the weather today? Very important. I'm a senior planner here at Sinala. Very grateful to have my colleagues and former colleagues with me, which are all dear friends. And we've all sort of got to know each other in the community planning world, Indigenous community planning world. So a little bit about my story and how my journey into planning really began back quite a few years ago when I was coordinating Swan Bay Rediscovery Program. It's like a kids culture camp. Um, and it happens in the very southern part of Haida Gwaii, very remote area that's boat access only. And running that program, I could see the amazing changes that were happening with our youth, being able to connect to the land, to the waters, to their culture and their language, and working with youth and with elders. And so that's really what drives me to do the community planning work, is to see that amazing change happen in something as simple as a kids' culture camp. Through that work, I applied actually to be the coordinator for Skidigate's comprehensive community plan, and that's where I met Jesse. Jesse was one of my mentors with ISC, or Indigenous Services Canada's mentorship program. So that was great to get into that world. Through that work, I also became a mentor with the mentorship program. So I've been doing that for over a decade now, working with Kara as well, doing that work. We've mentored doing nation to nation mentorship across British Columbia, as well as across Canada. In doing the work of running a kids' culture camp, I also became a very proficient proposal writer, as it was a not-for-profit organization and survived annually off of donations and grants. And then eventually I became the executive director for Economic Development Corporation, running our Heritage Center, as well as the ACTEV for the community. And then also through the community planning work, our nation decided that the focus was about protecting our land and waters, as well as revitalizing our language and our culture. And we decided that we were going to make a film. So we made a film, Edge of the Knife, which is entirely in the Haida language, and it translated into English as well as various other languages. But all of that work involved so much planning, and both from the production of the film to screening the film and sharing the knowledge within that work. And also, I've been the board chair and trustee of this Haida Gwaii School Board, a lot of planning for education and culture and language and getting kids out of the land here. And also a mother of 4. So there's a lot of household planning, which is, what I'm an expert in, household planning as well. Good morning, Joanne. Oh, it's so nice to see you here. That's our principal of education for the school district. So it's nice to see everybody. Over 200 people, it's 279 people here. So welcome everyone. Hawa Haichka.
Thanks so much, Dana. And if someone, I'll call out to the chat, if someone wants to link the CBC Gem link to Edge of the Knife, I think everyone can watch for free online. And we're going to talk a bit about what planning is, and thanks, Susanna, that incredible film is connected with community planning. So what are we here to talk about? Planning is broad, from family planning, household planning to, everyone plans in the day-to-day, but what do we mean by the kind of discipline in the profession of planning? How does the concept approach of Indigenous community planning differ from mainstream planning? And then I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of planning, comprehensive community planning, and that mentorship program that's already come up. And then we're going to talk a bit about like health specific plans. But I just want to highlight that we'll talk a bit about health plans, but so much of the work that we do ties into improving the health of our communities, not just those health specific plans. So, what is planning? I mean, in the really general sense, if we go to the source, the Professional Association for Planners in Canada, they define planning as the planning of scientific, aesthetic, and orderly disposition of land, resource, and facilities with a view to securing the physical, economic, and social efficiency, health, and well-being of urban and rural communities. So to break that down, planning as, a mainstream kind of discipline, the planners that you will run into in the municipality, they're talking about the science, of how our cities work. They're talking about the aesthetics of how our cities are laid out. And they're talking about the order, how all these different pieces work together, the orderly disposition of land. They're talking about land planning. They're talking about how resources are distributed. They're talking about facilities, but they're also talking about services, health services. And they have a view on securing the physical, economic, and social efficiency. So, how we use what we have in the most efficient way. And this is all to benefit the health and well being of any community, urban or rural. Um, how does Indigenous planning differ? Well, Maori town planner Harini Matunga, he outlines some of the contrasting characteristics of Indigenous planning. So, Indigenous planning has a strong tradition of resistance to political change, um, requiring a commitment to political, social, and economic and environmental change. Indigenous planning has always existed. Indigenous communities predate colonialism and were planned according to their own traditions and practices. And one of its central tenets um, is community and kinship and being place-based. Um, the roots of Indigenous planning are grounded in specific Indigenous peoples' experiences, linked to specific places, lands, and resources. And in other words, planning within, for, and by a particular Indigenous community for the place they call theirs. If the panel wants to add anything, but this is some of the distinguishing characteristics. So some examples of the type of planning that we might do. Indigenous communities are engaged in planning in multifaceted ways, from the site level to the community level to the regional to the national level. So there's this kind of ecosystem of different plans that exist and work together. So it could be like a national or territorial policy development or plan. It could be comprehensive community planning, which is based on with a First Nation. It could be a land use plan for a city or a community. It could be a health plan. And then you could get the strategic plan. What are the goals of your organization conceptually, and how do you want to get there? And into operational planning, which is more nuts and bolts. How are we really going to get there? So an example of one of our kind of favorite or close to our heart types of planning is comprehensive community plans, which they can often have health related goals or objectives within them, or they integrate and play with the health plans of a community. So a comprehensive community plan for a community is holistic and community driven, and covers all aspects of community. So it integrates health, land use planning, culture, like all of it within one. It kind of helps bring all of those departments together in a unified vision. And then, yeah, it's inclusive, inclusive of all voices. Engagement is a big part of it, sitting around the kitchen table to, having a movie night to knocking on doors, including all voices. It's culture and community specific. So often people will weave in metaphors related to the culture of the community. And it's long term. It's long term looking. It's not just looking at the election cycle, the next 2 years, the next 4 years. It's looking um, a lot longer into the future. And as mentioned, the CCP mentorship program is where, someone who might be new to planning can get a experienced Indigenous planning specialist paired up with their community to help them out at no cost. That's something that both Jesse and Dana have been involved with. And recently, the CCP mentors have developed this amazing Honoring Our Ways guide, or the How Guide, as we call it. It's a resource that guide that uses a four-phase model. They use metaphors like water's journey and culturally relevant engagement methods to support communities in planning that is, rooted in their ancestral wisdom. So we will have a link for that later, but I just wanted to highlight it. This is one of the pages from the How Guide that just shows one of the phases of planning using um, using culture kind of as a not a backdrop, but an integral part of the process. And this comes on the last page of the How Guide. It shows that, from that initial planning phase of sharing stories, into getting community together, into implementation and taking action, and finally into celebrating successes and monitoring our progress. It's a cycle, it's circular, and there's connections between each, and we can be in multiple phases at the same time. So that was CCP. I'm going to talk a little bit about some specific health planning examples. So it could be a health plan for a First Nation community. It could be the strategic plan for the health department. It could be their operational plan. We've worked on traditional wellness frameworks, and there's a lot of work actually in health governance. So, speaking of health governance, the first panel question that I have is for Kara. So, Kara, some of your recent planning work has included helping communities navigate the governance structure of Canada's health system. I have a picture here. This is a health governance structure that you've worked on. Could you describe this to us and maybe how this has been useful to the communities that you work with?
Yes, Kukshachim Sasha, thank you. Yes, so this just outlines Canada's health governance structure as we operate and function within this system in each province, territory, and then, of course, federally overall. And so, doing the work that I do, and I guess as I come in as like a really systems thinker, I always think, okay, if there's this issue that's happening within community, what are some of the systemic barriers, policies, gaps that are in place that are causing a lot of these health inequities? Anything else that might be occurring directly in communities and nations. And so, with some of the work that I've done previously, we developed and really did a full view of this health governance structure in Canada to understand how were all of these different systems put in place. And so you'll see it began with the 1867 Constitution of Canada that put in place the 1876 Indian Act that really determines and it determines how Indian matters are administered, such as funding, the reserve system, our band system, our elected governance, all of those different areas of our lives and livelihood. And so from there, we see that there are areas within the federal government. And then there's also provinces and territories. So, just to kind of provide a gist of this, is that the federal government provides the mandate to the provinces and territories to oversee things like hospitals, the registration of certain healthcare providers. Here in BC, we have the colleges for physicians, nurses, etc. And then we also have all these different ministries. And so the federal government outlines these health standards for what each of the provinces and territories need to meet in order to receive health transfer funds to the hospitals, to the health authorities. And so, coming from a First Nations lens, and of course, this is a really top-down model. This is a hierarchy, it's a bureaucracy, and there's all of these different layers that come within this health governance structure. And so, coming from a First Nations perspective, we need to understand how does the system operate so that we can have successful health transformation for communities, for nations, and doing health in a way that works for our people. Because right now these systems are imposed on us. And so the work that I do is really to support nations in seeing how do we move through these systems. And this is a passion that I come with. And so you'll see within the middle of this structure we have, particular to BC, is the Transformative Change Accord. And so this comes in with the First Nations Health Authority in BC specifically. Within our own First Nations health governance structure, we organize collectively. And so we have a provincial base, which is the FNHA, and that's where all of the over 200 First Nations come together to work on health matters, to advocate, to address health service delivery, health programs that are transferred from the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch. That's a federal program that now comes in directly to the province through the FNHA. We also have our Health Council, our First Nations Health Directors Association, and we have regional caucuses. So the way BC is set up is that we have 5 health authorities, 5 health regions. The FNHA has mirrored that. And so we have 5 health regions for our health authority as First Nations. And I just want to say that this system, though, is imposed, though, is something that we're working through now in navigating. It's not new for Indigenous peoples and for First Nations in BC to work together collectively and to organize collectively to advocate for needs. And so here, where I come from in the interior, we look to the 1910 memorial to Sir Wilfrid Laurier that speaks to our ancestors coming together from a multitude of nations to advocate for matters of land, of health, of title and rights, all these different areas that were so critical at the time and are still relevant today. And so we continue to do that. But now, when we look at, if we were to look at this structure from a community driven approach, how this looks is that from a community standpoint, a First Nation, otherwise we might think of it as a band, they are bringing together from a planning perspective, okay, what are the issues when it comes to our health? What do we want to see for health in our communities? What is our dream? What does health mean to us? My company's name is Cwelcwélt, and in Secwepemchin, my language, that means to be whole. And so my grandmother shared with me that's the closest our language has for a word for healthy. And so that resonated with me of, okay, we need to think of health in this holistic way. And so when we're planning for our communities and community directly, we can think about all the things that we want to see. And then maybe we have some issues that we're not able to tackle directly in community. So that might move to a nation level where all of our communities in our nation, my nation has 17 communities, work together to advocate for that, to understand the system, to see how we can address the system and making these changes. And then it can move up to also those regional levels through the regional caucuses in the interior or the north, the Vancouver coastal area, Vancouver Island, Fraser Salish, and then also then to the provincial level and then perhaps federal levels. And so it's all of these. And so coming from a community driven lens is ensuring we're hearing directly from communities what the issues are and moving that throughout those different layers of this health governance structure. And so this has been really key in the work that I do to ensure that we're understanding if there are all of these barriers, if there is health inequities that are occurring, where are they stemming from, and how do we begin to move forward away from these so that our communities are able to receive funds, resources, and really self-determine what health and wellness looks to them. And so just wanted to share those pieces. And so hope that kind of gives a nice visual for folks to see how this system kind of operates now. But I think it'd be really interesting also to see of how our nations, our communities would want to see this reflected differently for each of us as we're all so unique. Thanks, Sasha.
Amazing. A little snapshot into Kara's brain on screen. That's incredible. Okay, I'm going to go back just to participant view. So we've talked about what planning is, what Indigenous planning is, a bit examples of the work we do. As we've mentioned, CCP is a big one. And Dana, you actually recently begun working on the Skidegate CCP update. You're also involved in the first iteration. You've had a lot of planning students involved along the way. Um, can you tell me how CCP has benefited health and well-being in your community and maybe what you're hoping to see in this plan renewal coming up in the next couple of years?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question, Sasha. So just to give you a little bit of background information, Skidegate CCP was broken down into specific directions. The first direction, empowering our youth. Second is protecting our land and waters, which means like looking after our food systems as well. We say when the tide is out, the table is set. So that's really important to us. That which makes us Haida, like our language and our culture. We say that if we don't have our language and our culture, then who are we as a people? And then other directions would be to promote health and wellness within our communities. And really, since we did our CCP, we're celebrating all of these successes now, especially as we start this renewal process, is looking back and seeing all of these amazing things that we've done. So when we were talking about prioritizing back with the first CCP, our people said we need to make sure that language and culture revitalization comes first because that's who we are as a people. And then second was that health and wellness is next important because if we don't have our health, then we're not going to be around here to look after our families and look after our communities. So we knew that those were two main priorities. In terms of language revitalization, we wanted to make sure that our our kids were learning Haida in schools because Haida wasn't being taught equally as, for example, French immersion. So we were able to create a language revitalization program where our people could attend the program and get certified in the evenings, on the weekends, until they could get their full Haida language development term certificate program to teach in the schools. So now we have a whole bunch of students now, or a whole bunch of teachers now that have graduated and are teaching in our school. So that's been a big success. We also, through the community planning process, identified a bunch of our traditional laws or principles or ways of being and knowing, but not identified, but wrote them down and actually put them into the plan. And since we did that in 2017, we see our ways of knowing and being everywhere. All of the planning practices are including it. Um, it's in our pledge when you come to Haida Gwaii, the Haida Gwaii pledge. Our traditional ways of knowing and being are there. The language is there. It's in our land, sea, people plan. It's in marine planning. It's in health planning. It's everywhere now. So it's so great to see that being really the foundation of how we do our planning work is by grounding us in our traditional laws and ways of being. I mentioned also that we created a film to focus on Haida language revitalization. That's been such a big success, and we still continue to celebrate that. We also built a beautiful wellness center that sits on top of our village now, overlooking our village in the shape of like a longhouse with a copper area that looks like a totem pole. And next to that, we built a 24-unit elders complex so that elders can be close within walking distance to our wellness center. And we continue to focus on food sovereignty, food security programs. We know that having access to traditional food helps increase the wellness of our community and the health of our community members. And we're looking forward to hearing what the community wants to do next and what they want to focus on next.
It was amazing. I had the opportunity to be at Skidegate Open House recently, where the new planning students who are coming in to do their practicum were asking people, to fill out surveys and such. And a big part of this round is to go, wow, we've done a lot of what we set out to do. And a lot of the seniors were saying, we were asking what's different. And they're like, well, I'm getting better health services. Pretty incredible. So amazing work, Dana. And I'm really excited to see what happens as we continue. So yeah, things like open houses are great places to kind of start engaging communities, and engagement is so important. Like, how do we know the vision unless we're really talking to the people? So I'm going to pass it now to Katie. You've had a lot of experience doing meaningful engagement in Indigenous communities. It's harder than it sounds to really get all the voices in and have meaningful connections and have the community see what they've contributed actually reflected in the plan. So I'm wondering, in your experience, do you have any kind of key things that you keep in mind or follow to do good community engagement? And is there anything that, people should really be avoiding when they're taking it on?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a great question. And I want to start with, it's a funny joke that in my undergrad, we were, the planning students, and the joke was, oh, you're event planning students. And we were like, no, 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 we're, city planning students and urban planning students. But I've come to realize that actually really strong event planning plays such a crucial role in good planning. So the joke has come back full circle for me. Um, Not to say every bit of engagement involves an event. There's a lot of engagement that is not just, a meeting with the doors open. But yeah, I want to also start by saying that good engagement is ultimately defined by the communities that you're engaging with. And it's important, while considering the best practices and what you have in your toolkit, to prioritize listening to the direct needs of the community members that you are wanting to engage, and to be able to pivot your approach, or to at least fine tune your approach to suit their direct needs. And every community is different. Even every season has different parameters for what good community engagement is. So I can share some general learnings with that caveat that things are going to be fine-tuned depending on your situation. And we can kind of understand it as there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end. But the beginning and end are a bit mushy. So good engagement takes time before it actually starts. So before the meeting opens, before the Zoom link even gets sent out, engagement starts well ahead of that time. You need to ensure that participants and community members fully understand and can grasp with meaning what's happening, why is it happening, what activities will be had, and can anticipate what sort of follow-up will also be involved. In addition to the very specific event things like what is the space, is there going to be childcare available, what's food, what food will be available, what time, those sorts of specific things, of course, should be shared anyways. But this should all be shared well ahead of time so that communities have the opportunity to digest this information, share it with family members, share it with friends, ask questions of you if needed. And this part really happens at the community's pace, not your own. So patience on this process is important. And a point there that I really want to drive home is that this taking time before the engagement really starts as part of the engagement is such a crucial step in building trust in the process. And this is especially important on the topic of health, as it's so personal, it's so sensitive, it's so crucial to the future of our communities. And Canada and other administrations have a very fraught and very horrible history in health policy with Indigenous peoples. So approaching any sort of health-related engagement in a caring way is so vital to just ensuring people feel good about the engagement. So that moves us to the during the course of the actual engagement piece. Good engagement is accessible. You need to do your best to ensure that people feel safe, welcome, fed, without distraction, compensated, and ideally that they're feeling joy in the space that you're facilitating and hosting. So considering things like, and I'm just going to list a bunch of things here, considering things like the event space, is it accessible? Is it an inspiring place to host? For example, maybe a church basement may not feel the most accessible to people. Have you put ample breaks in your agenda? Did you share information about the engagement opportunity in channels that people follow and trust? Are you feeding people? Do you have tea and coffee prepared? Is childcare available for parents? And are you engaging at a good time of day where parents can join? Are you engaging at a good season, or is it hunting season and half the community is out? Are you paying people for their time? Do they know what to expect for their payment and compensation? Do you have cultural supports available in the space? Is the material that you're speaking to, is it shared at appropriate literacy levels, like health literacy, so that people are not alienated from your material and actually feel empowered to understand and participate? And health, like I said, can be a very emotional topic. Have you considered how to take care of the space when emotions get heated in the room? Are there opportunities for laughter and lightheartedness, right? To make space for that joy that should be a part of it. Are you giving people a chance to check in with their emotions at the beginning of the meeting so that we can, understand where people are at? Are you inviting a guest into the space who people don't know? And is there safety there? Are the participants made aware of that? So all of these questions, and that's just some of them, but all of them have implications for whether the engagement you're designing is accessible and felt as safe. So again, I'll say the concept of accessibility may differ slightly between communities. So designing for accessible engagement is important in getting to what's considered good engagement. And it's crucial that people can feel that they can meaningfully participate in your process. And then this gets to the end piece, which again is a bit mushy depending on what your project is. But good engagement doesn't end when the meeting is over. People need to know, and this happens at the beginning, so people need to know ahead of time that the time that they shared with you brings about positive outcomes for their community. They need to leave the space feeling like their time was well spent. People want to know how they're going to be followed up with. They want to be followed up with. And I know we talk about engagement burnout, and that is a real thing. But to people's credit, in my experience at least, people want to be asked. People want to be involved. People want more opportunities to engage. They want to be able to know that the knowledge that they're sharing is put to use. And people are eager to support if they're asked. So don't be afraid to ask people to engage more, but be prepared to compensate them for their time, for example. Good engagement lasts after the actual meeting itself is over. And good engagement continues to invite people into that process after the engagement. So are you allowing people to review the notes that you took of them, of what they said? And are you allowing them to correct things? Giving them the pen? Are you giving people copies of their data if you recorded interviews, notes, voice recordings or videos? Are you giving that data back to people so that they have it? Are people invited to review the draft copies of the next steps of your project? So yeah, good engagement shouldn't end in the moment. There should be consideration for how people are compensated as this process continues. And just to close it up, when I think of things to avoid, I think of engagement that is not considering these concepts. So facilitation that's highly structured with rigidity in the process, where there's limited dialogue ahead of time, where there's a lack of follow through after the engagement, where the language is so academic that people can't follow along. Anywhere where there's exclusivity designed in, that's something that I would need to avoid. And ultimately, I guess just the biggest point to drive things home for people is that, again, good engagement ultimately is not up to you to define. And you have to be flexible and willing to fine-tune your approach to what you learn. To position yourself, you are the expert in knowing what your engagement tools are, but it's the community members who are the experts in knowing how you should be using them. And what works for one community may not be the best approach for another, even if they're neighboring communities. And what works for one community in one seasonal part of the year may not be the best approach, around the corner 3 months from now. So building flexibility into your approach is the biggest piece of advice that I can give for your best practices toolkit when you approach community engagement on health.
Thanks so much, Katie. And I'm just thinking, like, sometimes we find folks who are like, I want to know this specific thing from this specific kind of person. You need to be flexible to what is going to be shared and open. Like, so many connections can be made by really listening deeply. And anyway, I love this. We're getting a crash course in engagement and health governance, all of the outcomes and tactics in CCP. We've covered so much. I kind of want to bring it back a little more high level to ask my last kind of personal question to Jesse. And my question for you, Jesse, is what is Sonala? What is the concept of Sonala, and how can it play a role in community health, well-being, and healing?
Thanks very much, Sasha. I think this concept speaks to much of the wisdom that's been shared by the other three brilliant speakers. And I just want to start by acknowledging how lucky we are to have these folks together. Kara, in particular, like your knowledge of the health governance system, like hardly, I don't know anyone else that could pull that all together and explain it so simply and beautifully. So what a gift. The word Sonala, when we were rebranding the company a few years ago, was seeking for a new name from the Bakumgala language of the Kwakwakiwak people that really conveyed what good planning is in my understanding of it. And so we had the great privilege of working with Chief Bobby Joe, who recommended this word, Sanala. And the way it's been explained to me, I want to acknowledge that so many words in our language are so complex. And so people can have different understandings, different interpretations, and that's okay. But the way I understand it is that the word Sanala means the goodness that comes from comprehensive planning and collective deliberation. And the story that Bobby Joe shared is or the example he shared is that when our people go to Potlatch to have a pasa, this is a huge multi-year undertaking for a chief working together with their family, their matriarchs, and the other chiefs, their community, their knowledge holders, their elders, to plan a pasa. There is so much work that has to go into it to do it well. And it's planning. And so over those years, you have to think about what is the work I want to do in the Gyutzi, in the big house? And do I have the prerogatives? Do I have the clear lines to do what I want to do? Or do I need to sort that out with other folks to make sure that everyone's supportive of what I'm doing? How many people am I bringing together? And how are they going to find out? How am I going to get the word out? How am I going to host them? How am I going to feed them? And so years in advance, you're thinking about the food gathering and harvesting. And then you're thinking about the gifts. How am I going to honor the witnesses and gather the gifts to honor them properly? And in some families, that's like folks are crocheting those little kitchen cloths and, working on regalia and different things years in advance. And then as you get closer to the event, the Pasa itself, you're bringing the chiefs together, the knowledge holders, the matriarchs, to sit and talk about the business you want to do and make sure everyone is going into it with clarity and with a good heart and with a good mind, so that when it comes to the sacred day, all the all of the material or pragmatic considerations are efficiently dealt with, efficiently planned out. You have your people back at house working with the dancers, and your singers are all there. Everything's organized. But also, when you do that well together and you look at all the pieces holistically and you take your time and you do it right, the nawalak, the spiritual energy that comes through, the healing energy of that work is profound. And so ultimately, that's a huge part of the purpose of the potlatch, of so much of our work, is the spiritual healing that comes from sitting together and witnessing a family uplift their cultural prerogatives and take care of their own family and the whole community in all these varied ways. So, Sanala just felt like such a nice word to talk about planning because, of course, it's about these material considerations, resources. You talked about like disposition of land. We would talk about, us here in the panel would talk about the reciprocal relationship with the land and all our living and non-human kin. So, of course, in planning, we need to be considering all of that, but we're also, I think, always thinking about the spiritual dimensions, like how am I calling my ancestors into this work? How am I honoring the spirits of place in all the work I do, whether it's in my homelands or not? How am I connecting with spirit while I'm facilitating so that goodness comes through me and I'm a healing force in the communities that I'm in? And how can I do my work with as much integrity as possible and grounding as possible so that others can come as their whole selves, their physical selves, their intellectual selves, but also their own emotional and spiritual selves with their whole stories, as a powerful entity, a member of my community. And how can we work together to do the magic that is visioning and planning and draw our hope and draw our utopian thinking out from the spirit world, out from the ancestors, out from the ether, and put it down on paper and bring it to life and put pictures around it, put words around it, so that together, I think about sitting in a meeting, in a community meeting, together we kind of like shape this kind of glowing ball of hopefulness of our vision for the future. And we say, yes, we're going to make this happen. It's like very powerful spiritual work. And if we pay attention to the healing potential and transformative power of planning while also attending to the material, the pragmatic considerations, our plans can genuinely transform the people that participate in them and our communities in truly magical ways that heal our lands, that heal our people, that make people feel safe, that lead to programs and services that uplift our wellness, whether in the health sector or not, in education, in elder care, in housing, in land management, in governance. It's all interconnected. And so good planning allows us also to feel our own agency that comes from calling our vision into reality and then working together to make it happen and seeing how that benefits our kids, and other people's kids and starts to transform the world in good ways. Because we know that human beings can be a force for healing in this world. And I think conventional planning has kind of forgotten that it's not about individual wealth or resource extraction or wealth inequity or individualism or ego. It's about working together, feeling good because you're connected and in that reciprocal web of relations with people and also the land and the non-human kin, and that together we can use our power, use our knowledge, use our skills to be a force for good so that we benefit everyone around us, and the land benefits as well. And so that's why I'm in planning, and that's where the name Sonala comes from.
It's incredible. I really want to thank everyone for everything they've shared. And um, planning can be such a healing space for us as practitioners. And um, yeah, it takes a lot of skill and time to learn how to, you know, create the space to let that magic happen. And just my hands are up, and a big thank you to all you folks who have taught me a lot along the way. It's 11. I'd like to give, ample time for some of the questions that have come up in the chat and in the Q&A. So I'm going to pass it to Serene.
Thank you, Sasha and Jesse and Katie and Kara and Dana. You guys have been amazing. The chat has been blowing up, and I know you guys have been answering quite a bit of the questions in the Q&A. This is just some of the questions if I ask and if I ask them that are in the Q&A, or it's just for the folks that are tuning in on the recording, so they can't see the Q&A. But we already have the answers, so it'll be a little bit quicker. But the first one is, do you find being trained rather than educated through like an institution as a planner was more of a help or a hindrance in your approach to examining and evaluating plans? I would say, Cara?
Yes, I can definitely speak to that. Thank you. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I have no formal plan. I didn't go to receive a master's in planning or any undergrad or whatnot. I have my education background is in art specifically. And so I found it was a real benefit for me to learn directly from individuals and in my community and within other communities and directly from other Indigenous planners. And so that I could see through this Indigenous planning lens versus perhaps more of an academic focus from the get-go. And so being able to understand how is Indigenous planning differently? What can this look like? How do I bring in our cultures and languages and our ways of being and knowing into this work so that it does align with our values and that it does, as Jesse was sharing, when we're like really bringing through ancestors and spirit and how we come across as planners or facilitators. And so I really believe it was a strong benefit to come in that way. I do see though, like how there would also be benefits to have gone through and received formal training as a planner and the opportunity to grow in the profession overall and becoming like a professional planner and things like that, but also understanding just really the foundations, the histories of planning from that more technical lens. And so I think there's benefit to both for sure. But personally, like I really enjoyed being able to be mentored into this role and to share that and also to show folks, we come in with these skills and with these values and traits as Indigenous peoples that any one of us could be a planner. And so if I can do this, anyone can do this. And it's a matter of, really being able to hold people up, to nurture them, to be able to bring them into these roles. And that's really been a strong passion of the teams that I've worked with, like Sonala, like Alderhill, to be able to mentor others and just nurture people into these roles as well. So I think it's so beautiful to be able to do that.
I love that too because it's kind of bringing back some of our traditional ways of how when an elder would see a trait within a youth or a young adult, and they would honor that by bringing in the mentor for that individual, and so that they can develop through that. And I like that you're doing that with your real life, and it's working. And I think that's what we've been saying for so long is like we need to acknowledge that community experience and community knowledge is just as high as some of the knowledge we receive from universities and whatnot. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And on that note, what type of traditional ways of knowing, being, and sharing are utilized in the planning process with engagements, particularly? Like example scenario, anyone who has been disconnected, discouraged in participating in their respective cultures. I'll put it in the chat if you want to look at it too.
Dina answered this question in the chat and suggested looking at the Indigenous principles that come from community practitioners like Kara, Dana, myself, and others that's in the How Guide. One thing I'll say is I think I'm really inspired by the elders and knowledge keepers that I know. Like, no matter how much knowledge they have, they're always so humble and yet so generous with what they do know. And there's a lot of dialogue happening right now around pretendianism. We have the Thomas King story, which blew up yesterday, and many others. And so I think there's a lot of discourse right now about who can claim identity and knowledge and teachings, and how do you share that? And if you don't know your own lineage in all of its detail, what right do you have to connect? And it's very complicated. And what I have seen from the elders and knowledge keepers that I really respect is um, that they have such deep knowledge about who they are and where they come from and are so quick to share that it's never an insult to ask someone what their roots are. And if they don't know, they'll share that as well. It's not so many of our people were taken out of community that a lot of people have broken lines, or a tenuous sense of connection. And that there's no shame in that, but you have to know that that's part of your story and communicate that, while also acknowledging the lineage that you do have, that you do know about, the connections that are there. So we have a value it's in all to know who you are and where you come from, so that you can represent yourself well and connect with others from a place of knowing and wholeness. And so the elders and knowledge holders I see have that knowing about themselves and that humbleness. Um, but they're also just coming from a place of love all the time. When they correct, or we have a word "iksala" to lecture with love. When they correct you, it's with love because they want to see you grow and learn. And when you do something wrong, they call you out as a gift to you. Um, and at the same time, you have a deep responsibility to know the limits of your own knowledge and protocol and not claim more than you should, um, or try and build yourself up for your own ego. And so I think for anyone, it's like, know as much of your story as you can, try and connect, recognize that in most communities, in my experience, you'll be welcomed in with love. Just walk softly and be humble. Admit when you don't know things. But if you do have legitimate teachings and knowledge, you also have a responsibility to share those. And a huge shout out here to the knowledge holders that even though they get called down for not doing things perfectly all the time, or they catch criticism, they know who they are, where they're coming from, and will share as much as they can. Despite that criticism, we can't be afraid to share either because we're afraid of being called down. Happens to the most revered elders, Um, so it's just very complicated and requires a lot of, yeah, transparency and communication, humbleness. Dana.
Thanks, Jesse. I think one of the things I've learned most about doing this kind of work is that planning it's relational, and it's about building relationships within your community, building trust within your community so that people are comfortable sharing their knowledge with you. And building those relationships and sharing of knowledge is also deeply personal. So, if you're going for tea, if you're visiting, if you're sharing food, like in our community, our leadership won't do business with you until you come and meet us face to face and you share food with us and you get to know us first. And then let's talk about business, right? Then let's do the work together of planning. And so I feel like, as a consultant, like I think that there was a question sort of posed there, is like, if you don't have a relationship to the community, well, you need to build a relationship to the community or with the community when you're doing that work. But also when you build relationships, they're like lifelong relationships, right? You don't just go in and do the work and then you leave. So like, for instance, we were talking a little bit about the School of Community and Regional Planning at UBC and all the SCARP students that have been coming to visit within communities. Many of those students that I've had come to the village here, I have lifelong relationships with. They keep coming back. They bring their families back. We keep interacting with each other. So I think that's something that's pretty powerful to me and the other communities that I've gone to visit and do work in.
Just yes, thank you. Just quickly I just want to hold my hands up as well and just provide an example. If you look to the Squamish Nation, they've shared with us over the past couple of years their journey and their comprehensive community planning. And instead of calling it a CCP, they're calling it their generational plan. And I think it's a really strong example of how Squamish Nation has created space in their nation to develop this plan for the future for all their generations, but it has through that kind of space, that safe space, instead of a typical CCP structure, they have this framework that speaks to their sacred knowledge, their sacred ways of being. And so it's kind of been, instead of maybe as a starting point having our culture and protocols and things like that and trying to like base it from there. They've just created that space to have those conversations, and from that have come to fruition this really beautiful framework that speak to feelings, like feelings of belonging and others. And so if you go to the Squamish Nation or you just like Google their generational plan, oh, someone popped it in. Thanks, Sasha. You'll be able to see that. And so I think it's a really good example of how we can see our ways of being and knowing come out through planning. And like as a result, planning then in turn supports this healing in our communities when we're able to come together that way and be able to see ourselves in these plans. And so another reason I really fell in love with planning, and so how we can see that come to life as well.
Thank you, Cara. I really like how you guys are talking about how it's interconnected, and it's about also just getting everyone's voices available, which kind of leads into our next question to Katie. You were kind of talking about outreach and how to navigate inclusive engagement and how to ensure all voices are being incorporated. Is there like what sort of things have you been noticing with like organizing transportation for elders and engaging with youth or on like Facebook? Like what um, sort of fun challenges have come up along the way to get outreach out there for some of the projects you've been working on?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, good engagement definitely doesn't come without its challenges. But they're fun challenges to tackle. I was working with a remote First Nation a year and a bit back where there were community members really scattered across the Yukon and in Alaska. And so trying within our budget to make sure that everyone, at the very baseline, knows about the event that we're hosting. And we hosted it in the small community where most people were, or there was like a dense population of First Nation community members situated in that small community, and then hosting in Whitehorse. But managing travel across, not only across the territory, but across the American border was something that I needed to figure out, even with things like, did we need certain insurance and those sorts of questions. Um, but I think a big learning and a big takeaway is everyone's really willing to help you out. You just need to ask good questions in community to get the support that you need. And I don't think anyone's ever expecting you, especially as a consultant from away, to have all of the correct answers and do everything right, because they know that the knowledge of how to get there is not in you, but it's in the community. And so rather than expecting you to get things right, they're expecting you to ask the right questions. And so to be able to navigate through those challenges of, especially of transportation, of community members and elders from away, I had to ask, who was the driver for the community? They had a driver. Okay, what's his price? What can we give him? What does he need? Where does he stay in Whitehorse? And okay, he doesn't go to Alaska. Well, who's coming from Alaska into the Yukon? What do they need for gas money? And just being able to know the grapevine and community, get to know the grapevine and community to ask the right people those right questions is really the answer there. So and then youth too. There's, in that community there was a school of 4 kids, and so that made it easy to be able to connect with each child in that community, at least each child at the school. And so being able to ask the teachers what the kids might want to do in a community engagement. Oh my gosh, they love to color. Okay, well, we'll get, a paint, like a paint by numbers thing planned out and set up with a local artist. So yeah, I think it's knowing that you don't have the answers, knowing that the community knows you don't have the answers, and just being humble and asking questions to get things done properly is really the position that I'm in as a consultant.
That's amazing. It sounds like you just need to kind of really be just like a friendly, personable curious person to be a planner,
Totally.
which I love. I think we don't have a lot of jobs like that. I think it doesn't seem as fun as most jobs. So I like hearing that this one is so different and fun. Yeah, and our next question is it's from someone that's a Cree Métis woman working within colonial system and feeling the weight of that structure. How do you approach colonial resistance, both structural and interpersonal, when bringing Indigenous concepts into mainstream planning processes? And what strategies could help those of us inside these systems push through that resistance?
I'd love to speak to this one if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think often I talk about planning work, or more generally, work can be decolonizing or indigenizing, and those are like two sides of the same coin. And sometimes I use the metaphor of like the decolonizing work that needs to be done is like imagine sort of a prickly rose bush, and the decolonizing work is like pulling out the thorns and pruning back the thorns, meaning the harm of colonization, so that the harm is undone and there is less harm going forward as a result of colonialism. And on the flip side, the indigenization side is like the beautiful flowers and rose hips that come off the plant that are inspiring and nourishing. And that is the work of uplifting our Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and remembering how to be in good relationship with the lands and with each other, and bring our knowledge of our ancestors and our good planning knowledge into the way we do planning today. And I see those going hand in hand. But I do think that it is more the work of non-Indigenous folks to do the decolonizing. That there was a question earlier about, the TRC calls to action, and I added like the RCAP recommendations, under all these things. There are all these recommendations, but they tend to be about how the federal, provincial, local governments, corporate entities, etc., can stop messing with our people so much. So they're not so much recommendations for us, they're recommendations for them about how to stop causing harm. It's the decolonizing work. On the other hand, we have people like Bobby Joe, so many brilliant knowledge holders who have this beautiful knowledge about how to be good planners. And so I think for so many Indigenous folks, when we have that time to spend in our own communities with those knowledge holders and thinking about how we translate those teachings into our work, that's like Katie's saying, like that's what makes it fun. That's the juicy part of the job. So they go hand in hand. Different people can play different roles. And I also see a lot of our people, Indigenous folks, getting really burnt out trying to work within colonial systems, pushing back and trying to do that transformative work and being tasked with doing that decolonizing work because they're Indigenous. That feels extremely unfair. And so I would call on all of our non-Indigenous allies to take up your part of that work. And hold the responsibility for the redress and the justice that needs to happen so that our people can be freed up to be in community and doing the indigenizing side of things and keeping that knowledge alive, which can't be done by non-Indigenous folks. Um, the last thing I want to say here is, it flew out of my head. I don't know. It was going to be great. Trust me.
Thank you. That was so well said. And I think we have a couple more questions here. Just got a new one. Wondering about how to incorporate balance or weave the Indigenous learning and engagement takes patience and time with some of the colonial timelines for funding and expectations for outcomes. Um, what have you guys been noticing with your balancing processes with certain projects and plans, and how to navigate that in a good way? Dana?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Serena. I love this question. Actually, being a proposal writer and doing a lot of this work is driven by fiscal timelines and reporting processes, and these are the constraints that many nations have trouble with. Like sometimes it's easy to get the money, but it's hard to get the work done by the fiscal deadline and do the reporting. So, and it's very colonized. So I think there's a lot of funders that are shifting the way that they do work with the way that they do the work with First Nations so that those timelines can be shifted. A lot of our work is done seasonally as well. We try to do the planning within our nations when people are not out on the land, when they're not fishing, when they're So in the winters when we tend to do a lot more Indigenous planning. So it's good to know about timelines for nations, what might be happening in the community when you're trying to do the planning work, as well as election timelines as well, like knowing when they're going into election, because everything tends to come to a standstill until people are back on board again. But yeah, the best thing you can do when it comes to those colonial timelines is just to reach out and have a relationship with the funder, call them and tell them what's going on with your project and ask for an extension. And usually they understand, especially about you can only go as fast as your community, and the communities aren't always on fiscal year end. So, oh,
Thank you. And we have just enough time for our last question, and it's to all of the panels, our guests, and this is the just wondering what it's like to plan in communities that are not your own, and what you've been like. You kind of briefly talked about some different protocols and engaging with those, and talking about your own limitations within your own capacities. But like when you're in a new community, what sort of things do you each of you take when you're engaging in a new community and whatnot? Katie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, this is something that's been on my mind a lot, especially as someone who's, I'm Indigenous, but what does that mean in this community or these communities here, when my home community is so, so far away? And I think to me it means, and it's an answer that, develops and will always develop for as long as I live and wherever I live, but I'm learning that it means that it's really important to know who I am, and to share who I am. And so that's why when I introduce myself, I use my language. And I mean, just yesterday, I was at a bookstore and bought another dictionary in Mohawk in Vancouver, which is always, a pleasure. But learning the language is so, so important. Um, and I think, I mean, this word has been shared before in this, but humility is really, really crucial. And just knowing what I know and knowing that I don't know a lot, and being very, very open to learning, and accepting that Plixla, the opportunity to be just presented with the fact that I will be encouraged to learn new things, um, is a really important step in that humility process. And then, yeah, I mean, I prep for visits, and I sit in that humility, and I prep for visits by learning what I can learn about the community. Haida Nation makes it very easy with an online. Before a bike trip to Haida Gwaii, I did an online um, orientation, and signed their pledge and donated my money, and that's an important step. So yeah, knowing who you are and knowing that you don't know a lot is an important positionality to take.
oh, I've just been throwing my stuff in the chat. But yes, I mean, I agree 100% with what Katie was saying. When I go to visit, I just came back from being in New Zealand. So I learned as much Maori as I could and use it when I'm speaking, like even if it's broken Maori, like using the language that I know. Also, bringing thoughtful gifts is really important. I know we try to learn a little bit about the community before we go in, especially if you're going into remote communities. What do they have access to? What do they not have access to? I found that donuts are very popular when going to community, coffee, chocolates, whatever items may not have access to and appreciate. Sometimes bringing something from home, like trading some of my traditional foods or teas or things like that. Um, that's also been great. And basing that in reciprocity that you are a guest visiting their territory and that you've been invited. And so you're honoring that invitation and bringing them a gift. Um, and then I also know there's some communities that don't have access to things like uh, fruit and vegetables or, a lot of those flying communities. So if you could bring things like that to share, it's always very, very welcomed. Traditional medicines are good, Margaret says.
I love that. I love when you get to give your gifts away and bring some home to them, and it's always fun. Cara?
Yeah, thank you. My brain is kind of process driven, so I appreciate because sometimes I have to remind myself of like those relational pieces that are so critical. So I appreciate Katie and Dana like sharing those, because I also work to bring those pieces into when I am visiting other communities and working with communities or nations that are not my own. But I also think about the comprehensive community planning cycle that we shared in the presentation, and so that first part of that cycle is pre-planning, and so that's like really getting ready to go into community to do the planning work. And a part of that is assessing community readiness. And so, myself as an Indigenous planner and going into other communities that are not my own, my ultimate goal is always to ensure that I'm not going to impose or contribute to any kind of harm within those communities or nations, and to be ensuring that I am going to be a good guest there, a good visitor. And so, one of the things that I do is I really ensure that I have really comprehensive conversations with the um, contact that I'm working with to ensure that it is appropriate for me to come in at this time. Community is ready. They want to engage. They want me to support in whatever it is, whether it's from a technical standpoint, advisory, whatever it might be. And so ensuring that community readiness is there. And because I have had situations where a community has reached out and they want support, but maybe they're not in a place to have someone who's not from there come in because it's not going to be well received. And so just thinking about those things, if we are outsiders in different communities or nations, organizations, whatever it might be, how do we go into that community in the best way? And so it always comes back to ensuring that, I'm standing really strong in my values. And I've learned that really well from folks in this space and others, and how that can look, and really just being able to voice that and have really open, honest conversations with communities and those that we're working with. And so I think that's one really important way that we can look to how we show up as guests in other communities and nations. And so from that like kind of CCP framework, it's a really good framework to use in any kind of planning because of all those different phases and how they do interconnect into any kind of planning work that we do with all kinds of different groups. So definitely a good starting point for sure.
Thank you. And Jesse?
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost, I bring a good heart and an extremely well-regulated nervous system. And if you can only pack one thing with you, may I recommend a well-regulated nervous system so that everyone you come into contact with, their mirror neurons pick up on that and you bring them calm and wellness and healing. I also personally bring all my kids and my husband. We're a package deal, so I only do work where my whole family can come along. Um, I will echo the good comments that have been made already and just end with saying, I think like this combination of humility always, like Katie said, it doesn't matter if you're Indigenous and you're going into another Indigenous community, always bringing humility and the understanding that there's so much you don't know, but combined with confidence in what you do know, grounding in who you are, and the willingness to share your gifts to the best of your ability, because we know that everything, all the wealth we have, including our knowledge and gifts, are meant to be shared. Their value comes from our generosity. And so I always come in humble, but ready to do what I'm asked. with that humility and uplift people around me to the best of my ability so that they feel empowered and better after our work together.
Thank you. And Sasha?
Me? Um, I'm thinking a lot about what it means to be a planner. I remember when I first mentored a planner in an Indigenous community when I was in my grad program. Um, First of all, he told me, you might not see the results of your work for like 30 years. You need to, invest and understand that, you're planting seeds along the way. And it's it's really important to, sit with folks, understand them, be understood, and spend that genuine time with folks. Because, and this is what he shared with me, in the end, my job is to work myself out of a job, which is strange within our kind of capitalist society. Um, but really, that's the approach you need to take because um, our work is kind of about sharing, this ability to make that, for better lack of a better term, to make that magic happen. Everything that's needed for communities to do this work is already there. We're just there to kind of listen and to tap in and create that safe space for it to come out. So I just think about that. We're there to work ourselves out of a job, and it's really it's really incredible to see the results of that work, even the small steps along the way. And yeah, you might not see it. You might not see it within your lifetime, but it's powerful work because it is so long term. It's, we're planning for the future generations. We're planning for the healing of our ancestors in the past, um, in addition to the right now. So yeah.
I loved hearing about all you that you guys shared and just knowing that like doing work that you can't sometimes actually see happening just kind of in the planning phase just shows how important it is for community health and well-being and how um, it's actually one of the best parts is that you're getting that ball rolling and getting people um, thoughts percolating about what they want to see their community as and envisioned, and just hearing all the amazing knowledge you guys have shared today is so inspiring, and I hope everyone who's tuned in feels the same way. But that's we're just at our time now, so I don't know if you guys want to say a quick goodbye or no. Um, I think Sasha has a slide for the resources that we will share here. And then we will also share this on the landing page when we post the recording at the end. So we'll let you guys
Maybe some of the
take
links that we shared along the way in the chat as well. There's some great examples of plans and yeah, other resources.
yeah. Also some more amazing infographics. The graphics are so beautiful. Love them. And yeah. Um, We'll just before we end this webinar, though, we'll show you some of the webinars that are coming up in the December. We have Len Pierre coming, talking about keeping in solidarity, self-care, community care, and ethical leadership in Indigenous health. That's on December 4th, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then Healing as a Decolonial Resistance, the Challenges and Hope of Indigenous Cultural Supports Inside and Beyond Prisons. And that is with Dr. Justin Tetrault, and that's on December 10th. And that's 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. All of our webinars are free to sign up for on our website at www.learningcircle.ubc.ca. We look forward to seeing you all at our next one. Thank you.